So the first speaker is Mr. Phillip Goldberg, author of American Veda and spiritual coach, who will be speaking on the evolution of yoga in America and the way Americans understand themselves, their attitudes about religion, and the way they engage the spiritual impulse. Also, we just want to say downstairs, there's pulmonary screening and yoga therapy and Ayurveda consultations just after the session. So, for the subject, we just wanted to say a quote that Vivekananda said. His quote is, "You have to grow from the inside out. No one can teach you. None can make you spiritual. There's no other teacher but your own soul." And with that, we'd like to introduce our new speaker.
It's before 1:30.
I think it's okay.
It's okay. I have never started a talk early. I demand that I go more than 18 minutes now. Wait, some of my friends were coming. Oh. Okay, it's almost 1:30. I've never been involved in anything associated with India that started early. This is really a bizarre experience. A few days ago, when I was contemplating how I should, well, I was contemplating two things: how to squeeze the content of a 350-page book into an 18-minute talk. And I was contemplating how to begin speaking about the sort of overall history of this transmission of great teachings from India to America. And as I was thinking about it, someone sent me, an old friend of mine, whom I hadn't seen in a long time, sent me this in the mail, in an email. That's me. 40 years ago, lecturing about transcendental meditation in Massachusetts. I was a very precocious 6-year-old. And it started me thinking how much has changed in those 40 years, aside from my hair. At that time, 1972, meditating was a very strange thing to be doing. It was strange to be doing it. It was stranger to be teaching it. In 1972, when somebody like my father was asked, "What does your son do?" and he said, "He teaches meditation," that was a very, very bizarre thing in people's minds. At the time, most of the people we were teaching meditation to were young people, like the ones, Yale students on this magazine cover, who were inspired by the Beatles' trip to India. And so it was mostly something that students and hippies did. Now, this is the face of meditation. A few short years after that embarrassing picture of me was taken, meditation started to go mainstream, largely as a result of the early research that other people here at the conference are speaking about. Now, there's probably over 1,000 research papers on meditation. And back then, sometimes on weekends, we would conduct weekend-long meditation retreats at an old, dilapidated Jesuit monastery in the Berkshires. That monastery is now the Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health, where 30,000 people a year take yoga-related workshops. Back then, you had to sort of hunt around, even if you lived in Boston or New York, to find a Hatha Yoga teacher. Now there are over 35,000 registered yoga teachers with Yoga Alliance and many more unregistered yoga teachers. Back then, the only kirtan you saw or heard was with the devotees of Srila Prabhupada at ISKCON. And of course, at those days, they were mainly the butt of jokes and sort of considered a public nuisance for chanting in the streets and the airport. Now, I just came from spending 2 days at Bhakti Fest. How many know Bhakti Fest? Well, you should. Christopher Chappell and I were there, and it's still going on. It's Thursday through Sunday out in the high desert, 2 hours from LA, where images like this occur, where there's kirtan literally 24/7, and 12 hours of yoga classes a day in 3 different venues, and 3,000 people were there, mostly young, but not only young. The young were camping, the others were in air-conditioned motels. And so this is just some of the changes that just occurred to me this week as I was thinking about just the last 40 years. But it's those things, the yoga classes, the meditation research, the upsurge of kirtan as a practice, these are really just the sort of tip of the iceberg when it comes to the real impact of the yoga heritage on America. They're the most visible signs. There are so many other profound and subtle signs that America is becoming, and I really believe this, a nation of yogis. They won't all be doing asana practice, they won't all be meditating, but in spirit, in attitude, and in their approach to their spiritual lives, their inner lives, we have become or are becoming a nation of yogis. And there's a lot of evidence for this. When I was researching my book, American Veda, I looked at some of the surveys of religion and spirituality over the last 30 or 40 years. And what becomes clear when you look at it is this shift in the direction of what yoga, what Hinduism, what Sanatana Dharma has been teaching us for thousands of years, especially since the 1960s. But if you look at how Americans view themselves, how they think of who they are and what they can become, how they engage their spirituality, how they see themselves in relation to the rest of the cosmos, you see the perspectives of primarily Vedanta and yoga with a little Tantra thrown in for spice. But these are some of the directions if you look at the data. One, a move away from strictly a belief-centered religious attitude toward an experience-centered sense of spirituality. Away from what some scholars call a dwelling religion, where identification with an institution or a religious tradition is primary, to a questing or a searching kind of spirituality where personal choice and experimentation is the driving force. and away from the attitude that my religion is the one true way and the only true way, to one a growing acceptance of all pathways to the divine, something very close to truth is one. The wise call it by many names, as the Rig Veda verse is often translated. And away from a kind of dualistic theology where God is somebody separate and apart from us, to a more of a unified non-dualism where the divine is both transcendent and immanent, and where people start to have a sense of, even if they've never heard the expression tat tvam asi, they start to identify the divine as within them, not just something unreachable and apart. And away from seeing the innermost self as either fallen or sinful in the theological sense, or as depraved in the Freudian sense, and something more toward an Upanishadic sense of Atman as the self. Or as one clever scholar put it to me, we've moved from original sin to original bliss. These are discernible changes, and you can see it in the data, especially among young people, where the fastest growing category in American religion is spiritual but not religious, or what some scholars call the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, for identifying with none of the above, but having a strong spiritual engagement that they value and participate in their own way. These are yogis, whether they practice the formal sense of yoga or not. There's a lot of reasons for these developments, some of them having to do with aspects of American culture. But I think we would not have seen these shifts. We could not possibly have seen these shifts without the importation of yoga and Vedanta over the course of the last couple of hundred years. They have filtered into American life in ways I document in my book, and many of which are so subtle and so sort of invisible that many people are in effect yogis without knowing anything Indian is going on. They just absorb it through the culture, through their psychotherapist or their doctor or their minister or rabbi, or through somebody they take a course with. These are subtle changes in worldview that have snuck in. And while it peaked in the 1960s, it started much earlier. And I'm going to sort of run through some of the ways it has. Of course, it came through the great gurus who came here, beginning with the first and perhaps most influential, Swami Vivekananda. As you all know, I don't have to go into why he comes first in this. I always call him the Jackie Robinson of this great transmission. And it breaks my heart, but I speak in places where they don't even know who Jackie Robinson was, let alone Vivekananda, which is a sad thing. And it came through Paramahansa Yogananda, who was called the first superstar guru of the 20th century and the first to make America his home. And then in the 60s and 70s, to a whole parade of gurus who became prominent, each of whom bringing out different aspects of the Sanatana Dharmic tradition and attracting different followers, right up to the present two most best-known gurus. And we will pause for a moment to admire my product placement. this is not Photoshop. It's just my favorite photograph. But it also came not just through the obvious, the gurus and swamis and yoga masters, but secondarily through the people they influenced and people who never met a guru because they were born at a time when there weren't any, but who had read the great literature of the Vedic tradition and absorbed it into their lives and their work and then transmitted it to others. And it begins in America with Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, who were reading these books in New England 200 years, well, almost 200 years ago. But they started to come in. Emerson's father was reading it 200 years ago. And then later, through people who were influenced by some of the swamis that followed Vivekananda and the Ramakrishna order, people like Aldous Huxley and Christopher Isherwood, who pictured here with Swami Prabhavananda, and people like Joseph Campbell and Houston Smith. These are giants of Western thought who absorbed Vedantic teachings, added them to the other sources of their expertise, and transmitted them to, in many cases, millions of people through television and books, and in Houston's case, his classic textbook on comparative religion. And then later, other scholars like Alan Watts, these are public intellectuals, and today, Ken Wilber. And it came through psychologists like Abraham Maslow, who very few people, who was sort of the father of self-actualization theory and humanistic and transpersonal psychology. Very few people know that he was studying the yogic texts for his models of higher consciousness and what was achievable by human beings. And Dr. Richard Alpert, who, as many of you know, became Ram Dass after meeting his own guru. And it came through people in medicine like Dean Ornish and, of course, Deepak, and now Dr. Oz, who became spokespersons and practitioners themselves. And it came through the arts. It came through poetry. It came through Walt Whitman and T.S. Eliot, and in more recent times, Allen Ginsberg and many other literary figures, novelists like Hermann Hesse and Somerset Maugham, who wrote The Razor's Edge, which has a depiction of a guru that was modeled after Ramana Maharshi, and J.D. Salinger, who wrote fiction about contemporary young seekers searching for moksha in the midst of life in New York, and was quoting Ramakrishna and all the other great masters in his work. And it came through music, when the great violinist Yehudi Menuhin brought Ravi Shankar to the West, and through the influence of his music, ideas, the underlying spiritual dimension of Indian classical music started to be communicated, and it came through jazz artists like John Coltrane and Paul Horn, and John Coltrane's wife Alice, who many of you may know became a Swami and had her own ashram after a while. And of course it came through the intersection of Indian music and Western pop music and rock, when sort of raga met rock, when George Harrison studied with Ravi Shankar and introduced the sitar to rock and roll and started to write lyrics like the ones. I just did a presentation at Bhakti Fest called The Beatles Yoga. And so I always call George's song, Within You, Without You, the first rock and roll Upanishad. And if you don't, go home and Google the lyrics and you'll know why I call it that. And the other thing that musical influence did was lead to this moment when the Beatles found a guru and started meditating. And overnight, because the Beatles were who they were, everybody suddenly heard that there's something called meditation, and there's some towns called mantras, and people called gurus, and places called ashrams. And this overnight changed the perception of the world, the Western world, on the yogic tradition and what it had to offer, because, hey, if John Lennon can do it, we should all do it. If you were young, that's what happened. And the musical influence continues. Now there are kirtan superstars, all of whom were at Bhakti Fest this weekend, now attracting, instead of 10 people in a yoga studio, hundreds, if not thousands of people coming to chant with them. And they doing authentic Sanskrit mantras when they chant. And there's even hip-hop Puranas. How many know MC Yogi? See, go Google MC Yogi and download some of his songs, and you'll hear the story, the tale of Ganesha and the tale of Hanuman and all that in hip-hop form, so you can, now maybe your children will pay attention. This continues, and of course now we know, through all this evolution, the forms have changed, the delivery systems have changed, what people are drawn to seems to change, but the essential teachings remain the same, and they have had a tremendous impact on America, as I said. Now this is the face of yoga in America, as we know. Asana. Now, it's important to realize that most Americans, when they hear the word yoga, this is what they think of. It's come to be that asanas are synonymous with the word yoga. This is, of course, something that's troubling to many of us. At the same time, it has opened the doors to yoga, to the deeper yoga, to millions of people who might not otherwise have done it. And this is kind of the way things have always been. It's interesting to note, and I sometimes have to point this out to young people, that the giants on whose shoulders all these contemporary yogis stand on, the ones we just saw depicted, very few of them mentioned asana. They might have taught asanas privately to some of their students. Back in the days when Yogananda was teaching, he had asanas, but it was just people, and there was no kirtan except maybe the devotees would do puja once in a while. They were emphasizing meditation and knowledge. And then in time, especially with the advent of the students of Krishnamacharya, Iyengar and Pattabhi Jois, then somehow asana came into the forefront, and all the Americans who were trained as yoga teachers are well trained in asana, but don't know the rest of the story that well. And that brings us to the present. I always leave this up at the end as a subliminal cue to say, the booksellers have me remind you books are for sale. But I wanted to take the last few minutes of my 18 to talk about the future as part of this evolutionary process. In my mind, everybody here is a Swami Vivekananda in his or her own way. We are bringing these teachings. 10 more minutes, it's fabulous. I really rushed. We are the ones bringing these teachings forward, and the direction it goes now, and whether yoga will remain synonymous with asana, or the deeper teachings will find their way to the fore, and balance will be restored, is largely up to people like us, and the people we talk to, the people we teach, the things we write. And ever since American Veda came out, which is almost 2 years now, I've been giving these talks and going places, and certain things have come up And so I feel compelled, even though it may sound a little presumptuous, to say certain things about what our task is as we bring forward into time these eternal, timeless teachings. And one is the need for vigilance. It's important to adapt these teachings to contemporary life in this strange new world in such a way that we don't corrupt them or distort them or dilute them. And at the same time, we need to be flexible and creative in adapting to new languages, new technologies, new cultural standards, new way of life. And one of the things I came to admire so well about the teachers who had a big impact on the West was that most of them were very skillful at doing that. They were very vigilant about not corrupting their particular lineages, but at the same time they adapted them to the West. So Vivekananda, for example, did not speak a whole lot about Ramakrishna's Kali devotion. That was something you learned about once you were on the inside. He emphasized the principles and the core teachings of Vedanta. And he outlined the 4 yogas so that, and emphasized practice. And he did it in such a way that was not offensive to anybody's religion or to secular people who were very scientifically oriented. It's one of the great gifts of the tradition is that it can be adapted to everybody, different lifestyles and different perspectives. Similarly, Yogananda. If you go to any of the Yogananda lineages, such as the Center for Spiritual Enlightenment down the road here, and you go on a Sunday morning, it will look like a church service. Well, they don't have that in India. They don't have rows of pews and Sunday morning services. He adapted when he saw how Americans practice their religion. He distributed some of the teachings with mail order. Didn't do that in India. That was a new technology in the 1920s. So there's ways of adapting without compromising the integrity of the teachings. And now, given what the situation is in yoga, we need to give people what they come in the door for, whether it's losing weight or back pain or whatever, and yet also let them know there's more. Because they'll start to feel that impulse. And we need to be conveyor belts and address people where they are. I remember when Maharishi Mahesh Yogi came and started doing his lectures on TM, he spoke about enlightenment in his first lecture, and one of the questions at the end was, will meditation help me sleep? And he said yes, and the next day's headline in the local newspaper was, Yogi says meditation cures insomnia. And so, of course, the joke was I came to wake people up and they just wanted to sleep. So these things have to be adapted. The second thing I want to say is, if you look around here this weekend, you'll see predominantly people of Indian descent. I just came from Bhakti Fest. There were 3,000 people there. I could count the people of Indian descent on my hand. There's these 2 worlds of the Sanatana Dharma, and somehow, all these brothers and sisters in the Dharma need to get together more and communicate more. I know there's serious cultural differences, but that will change over time as the Indian population assimilates into America, and as Americans who practice yoga and meditation become more and more drawn to the broader teachings and maybe want to go to a Hindu temple once in a while or experience a yagya or whatever. there needs to be more communication. I would just urge all of us to find ways to do that, and because we're all in this together. And another thing I want to talk about is most of the emphasis on yoga seems to be, well, on individual transformation. These are powerful technologies of inner development. But it seems to me there's a social dimension that needs to be emphasized as well. And I've always felt this, but the last 2 weeks of political conventions have just forced me to say, you know, we got to start being conscious about the need. I mean, there's all this talk about election reform, and we need consciousness reform. We need to really change consciousness in America. We need to change how people's minds work, how the brains work, how the heart operates in relation to other people in the natural environment. And the yogic repertoire offers us that, and we should not be shy anymore about its larger impact. And the last thing I want to say is, because I've encountered it, and many of you have too, was there's opposition out there. There's some opposition from secular sort of people who don't like anything having to do with religion and spirituality in the public sphere. But that's minor. But the other opposition is from those who think we're all doing the devil's work. We know who they are. And we complain a lot. But, you know, time comes when you have to stand up and speak the truth. One of the things that I came away, I always admired Vivekananda, but when I researched my book, I had to look into his life a little more deeply, and I hadn't realized before how much, because we all talk about how he was embraced and how everybody wanted to come here and speak, and which is a remarkable thing about America. They were that open-minded even in 1893. But there were others who were attacking him as this heathen, teaching false religion. And he didn't stand up for it. He didn't just turn the other cheek. He let them have it. He told them what they could do with their missionaries. He was warrior-like in standing up for the Dharma. And I think, you know, we need to do the same. But to quote their own Savior, we need to be as wise as serpents and as gentle as doves in doing it. But it's out there. And I think, you know, we shouldn't be in denial that there's people who think that yoga is a threat. But they're dying out. The future belongs to the yogis, I think. So I'm going to close here so I get my 18, I can be proud of my 18-minute limit. And I guess we have some time to open it up. Thank you.
We won't be having any questions because we need to go to the next speaker.
Okay. As you wish.
Our next speaker is Swami Prasannatmananda of the Vedanta Society in Berkeley, and he will be speaking on yoga for transformation of consciousness, as given by Swami Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda suggested a synthesis of yogas for the transformation of consciousness. This talk will present the nature of this transformation and the 3 stages for the synthesis to occur.
Speaking to the mic.
So I would like to invite Swami Prasannatmananda.
Yang Bhadranasuva. Let what we hear may it bring some good to us. Just now we have heard from the previous speaker a wonderful talk, and during his discourse he told us that we have to transform our consciousness. Now I am going to speak how we can transform our consciousness. Swami Vivekananda's unique contribution is that he said how we can transform our consciousness. I think Swami Vivekananda in this place need not have any introduction, special introduction of Swami Vivekananda. And so he is the 19th century spiritual teacher with the prophetic vision of the future humanity. And just we heard in continuation of that, he was the man without frontier. And as the British Indologist A.L. Basham said wonderfully, in centuries to come, Swami Vivekananda will be remembered as one of the main molders of the modern world. So I shall discuss Swami Vivekananda's point of view regarding the transformation of consciousness. It is not because this year is 150th birth anniversary, but because I fervently believe that over the passage of time, this message will become increasingly significant for the modern world. So again, Vedanta and Yoga. Transformation of consciousness by the synthesis of Yoga is indeed a unique interpretation of Yoga and Vedanta by Swami Vivekananda. Vedanta provides the goal orientation and Yoga brings about the transformation. In other words, Vedanta provides the theoretical framework and Yoga works out the practical details. This is the scheme of Swami Vivekananda's theory of transformation of consciousness. Traditionally, what is the concept of Vedanta regarding Swami Vivekananda? Traditional Vedanta stresses the transcendental aspect of Brahman, whereas Swami Vivekananda stressed both transcendental and immanent aspect of Brahman. This is also one of the unique contribution of Swami Vivekananda. Just we have heard there are two groups. One are extreme transcendentalist and other are extreme social and practical followers. So there are huge gulf of differences. But Swami Vivekananda, he utilized the principle of Vedanta in the transcendental and immanent aspect. Vedanta is not mere speculative philosophy, but a practical philosophy which aims at direct experience. And Vedanta is a philosophy which have a practical constituent and individual. It has the practice and experience, theory, practice, experience, these 3 steps. So Swami Vivekananda freed the scripture-bound, world-negative and exclusive philosophy of Advaita from the Hindu matrix and converted into a life-affirming, existential, practical and universal philosophy of all people all over the world. Then what is the concept of yoga of Swami Vivekananda? Yoga has 2 meanings. Yuj, in Sanskrit the root word is yuj. Yuj has 2 meanings. One is union, another. So, is it audible? So the root word yuj has 2 meanings. One is union and another is concentration. So the Patanjali, he used the sense of concentration and the union between Atman and Paramatman that is used in the Vedanta. Yoga is the manifestation of the potential divinity of the soul. This is the unique interpretation of Swami Vivekananda combining yoga and Vedanta. So spirituality, what is spirituality according to Swami Vivekananda? Spirituality is not merely a belief or specific spiritual principles, nor a mere attitude towards life and reality. True spirituality is the orientation of one's whole life into a spiritual ideal and the transformation of one's whole life in accordance with the dictates of that ideal. So the transformation, unless there is the transformation of consciousness, we cannot consider it a spirituality. So in one place, Swami Vivekananda said, spirituality can be seen, can be touched, can be felt. It can be experienced. Unless we experience the spirituality, unless we see the spirituality, perceive spirituality, it has no meaning. Something is coming down from the sky, this spirituality has no meaning. So Swami Vivekananda's conception of yoga, 5 key original ideas. Yoga is the transformation of human consciousness into divine consciousness, whereas ordinary human life is the struggle for the transformation of animal consciousness into human consciousness. Animal instinct, human reason, and spiritual illumination are the 3 stages of human evolution. The ultimate aim and purpose of yoga is to enable a person to transcend the limitation of the senses and mind and gain direct supersensuous experience of the ultimate reality. The process of transcendence has been conceived in different ways. The removal of ignorance, God's self-revelation, etc. Then the yoga is the revolution. It differs from ordinary biological evolution in 3 ways. Evolution is, as pointed out by Darwin, is the struggle for existence. But yoga is the struggle for higher consciousness. Evolution affects only the body and mind, in Vedantic term, which is called Prakriti. But yoga is the manifestation of the Atman, the pure, unchanging consciousness. Evolution is slow, but yoga is the process of speeding up evolution. So it is a kind of revolution. Swami Vivekananda said, in this speeding up theory. The idea of the yogi, the whole science of yoga, is directed to the end of teaching men how, by intensifying the power of assimilation, to shorten the time of reaching perfection instead of slowly advancing. So yoga is the process by which this evolution, this transformation of consciousness can be made very fast. Yoga is the conservation, concentration and sublimation of psychic energy, which is called prana. Again, one of the major contributions of Swami Vivekananda to the modern world is the reinterpretation and popularization of Raj Yoga. Raj Yoga is one of the 4 yogas taught in Tantras. But Swami Vivekananda's Raj Yoga is the unique combination of Patanjali's Yoga, Vedanta and Tantra. It is a unique contribution. Then the synthesis of yoga. Now we shall take up the synthesis of yoga. Swami Vivekananda's concept of synthesis of yoga. 4 main capacities or faculties of human beings: the cognition, thinking, volition, will, affection and connection, the feeling and drive, and the work. Each yoga is designed to develop one faculty or aspect of personality. But Swamiji suggested a synthesis of yoga. All the achievements and glories of humanity are the result of the proper development and use of these 4 faculties. Spiritual life does not mean the neglect of any of these faculties. Most people do not attain equal development for all the 4 faculties. Swami Vivekananda believed that one of the functions of yoga was to develop, purify and spiritualize each of the faculties. Jnana Yoga develops the intellectual faculty. Bhakti Yoga develops the emotional faculty. Raja Yoga develops the volitional faculty. And Karma Yoga develops the capacity for efficient work. For the full development of human personality, a synthesis of all 4 yogas is necessary. Swami Vivekananda said in this regard, "Would to God that all men were so constituted that in their minds all these elements of philosophy, mysticism, emotion and work were equally present in full. That is the ideal, my ideal of a perfect man. It is not the practice of a little of each yoga, that would be only the combination, not a synthesis of yoga, that is the combination only. So what is the synthesis of yoga? Synthesis of yoga means the unification of all the 4 yogas on the basis of a common theme. And Sri Aurobindo has echoed the same theory in his philosophy. According to Swamiji, 2 main themes of the synthesis of 4 yogas, that is, the manifestation of the potential divinity of the soul, the union of the individual self with the cosmic self. That this process takes place, it brings about the transformation of consciousness from the human consciousness into the divine consciousness. So these are the 2 main things. How this transformation takes place? in 3 stages: purification, awakening of the individual self, and seeing the Supreme Self in all. The freedom, the purification, the freedom from the instinctual drives and the strong emotional impulses is known as purification. The roots or seeds of these drives and impulses, like lust, anger, greed, egoism, etc., reside in 2 planes of the mind, the conscious and the unconscious. The impurities of the conscious mind can be detected through the alertness of mind. We can just detect this mind. The impurities of the unconscious mind can be eliminated by meditation. So these are the lower yogas. Then the last is the awakening of the individual self. Again, the higher yogas, it has 2 parts. In Tantra, it is called the awakening of Kundalini. And what is the effect of this transformation of consciousness? It is the union between the individual self and the Supreme Self. It manifests in our day-to-day life as well as in the higher transcendental experience. It's bring about a radical transformation in one's attitude and quality of life. It changes our human relationship and gives them a divine quality. I shall quote Sister Nivedita's saying, which she wrote in the preface of Swami Vivekananda's complete works. She said, "If the many and the one be indeed the same reality, then it is not all modes of worship alone, but equally all modes of work, all modes of realization, everything. There is no distinction henceforth between sacred and secular. No labor is to pray. To conquer is to renounce. Life is itself religion." So this is the transformation of consciousness according to Swami Vivekananda. The transformation of consciousness within and the effect without. The external effect is that the whole attitude was divinized. This is the unique conception and contribution of Swami Vivekananda for the transformation of consciousness. Thank you very much.
Anyone has a question? Then
Yes, please.
I didn't know that Vivekananda had come to the United States in 1893. Do you know where he traveled?
Yeah.
It,
It is a wonderful book is there, actually is available. Each date, it is the date-wise chronology. You can find which date Vivekananda traveled to which place, where he stayed, and to whom he came across. And what is the significant event took place.
what's that called?
Swami Vivekananda's itinerary.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Any more questions?
I am really impressed by the activities of this Yoga Bharati. I happen to come in different occasions to this institution. and I am very pleased to see their dedication to the ideology and their effort to bring about the change not only in health, because it is an integrated process, the health, mind and spirituality. It is yoga is combined with the integrated thing. So I found that yes, they are emphasizing three phases of it. So thank you.
Next speaker is Dr. Prasad Kaipa, the CEO, advisor, and coach. He will be speaking on yoga and wise leadership. He will help us understand how the yogic ideals of transcendental and humanistic values, objective reality, and subjective experiences can be utilized to solve corporate challenges.
Namaste to everybody. To speak in front of various Swamis and invited guests, I consider this as my honor. And this is the first presentation I am making on the upcoming book. As a matter of fact, around 11 o'clock this morning, I just finished editing it. So I take this as an auspicious opportunity to just think through what I tried to present in this book. The context in which the yoga and the wise leadership become important is because of the complexity that we live in. If you look at the diversity in the room, it's just a reflection of what's going on out in the world. The idea of how Mr. Goldberg talked about how there was large amount of interest. For example, in a Bhakti fest, there are large number of Western audience and very few Indian audience. When you call it Yoga Sangam, there are lots of Indian audience and there are some Western audience as well. So the key part it comes down to is recognizing that the diversity has become the name of the game and how you work with it. Because the world has become one small, interconnected, as they call Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that has become a reality. It is no longer something which you can talk about in Vedas or Upanishads, but we are experiencing it. In addition to the diversity, the second major problem that comes up is the interdependence. Like, if you look at the clothes you are wearing, probably many of the parts of the clothes come from many parts of the world, as a matter of fact. And like when I was working with Boeing, a gentleman called Alan Mulally, who is now heading up the Ford, he used to say, we have 30,000 suppliers coming from 43 different countries and approximately 17 million parts that go into any single airplane, which is being sold to something like 37 different airlines, and every plane is customized for all of them. So in some respects, the interdependence is the name of the game, because whether we like it or not, whether we appreciate it or not, just taking the word human being is a social animal is no longer sufficient. We are actually completely part of the interdependent nature of the reality that we live in, which is even reflected recently when you look at Facebook or when you look at Twitter, when you look at all the things that are going on, that shows the need for not just the internal way of recognizing the interdependence and the external way in which the world is reflecting what is going on. The third one is obviously the globalization. I don't think that I need to talk very much about. And the fourth one is the speed. Of course, some of the traditional one in the Silicon Valley we use is that there are some things called Moore's Law. One Moore's Law was talking about how quickly the number of transistors began to increase and the size of it is becoming smaller and smaller, and the speed at which it goes is even faster and faster. So for example, a small computer like this, what it contains, and when I was doing my PhD about 30 years ago, even the computer which was in a whole room, the IBM 360, didn't have the capability that this has got. And I wouldn't be surprised in probably a couple of years, whatever is there is probably far superseded in a computer, in a phone that you will have, and in a few days probably we will have just the earpiece, we'll miss the phone itself. So the world is getting to a place where the speed of information, speed of change is much faster than how human beings can assimilate. So the need for today is not having more information, is not having more data, but having an interpretation of that information. That's the reason why, if you notice, people are more interested in the editorial. How do you really make sense of the data that is present? It is not just having the data. Like for example, if you go to Google and if you search for anything, you get so much of information, most of it is irrelevant, or you don't know what to actually make sense of. So how do you really use speed as a way to connect with oneself and connect with each other? That is becoming extremely important, because the next one is the ambiguity. What comes with the speed is the ambiguity. We don't know how fast we need to do. Like business leaders, well, because the topic is wise leadership, are all quoted for wrong reasons these days. Majority of the time, like for example, one of the doyens of Indian management, Rajat Gupta, ends up getting what you call indicted for certain things. Probably, here people, when I talk to various people, they say, well, that happens all the time, except that he got caught. When we begin to take it for granted, something which we thought about very carefully at one time, what is the basis of my action? What is the basis of my decision? How do I really think about what is appropriate, what is not appropriate? What is the coda? What is the logic by which I make decisions? When we talk about buddhi, samsayatmaka buddhi, when you talk about some of the buddhi thing, what is the nature based on which you make decisions? It's not about decisions. It's about the underlying logic that we use, that we make decisions. That is becoming much harder because of the ambiguity. So the moral ambiguity, lack of ethical compass, the lack of value system that is shared becomes extremely important and brings the need for yoga and some other things. What it all comes from is a scarcity mindset. Instead of a certain abundance, we are always looking at how do we manage our time. One of the things which most people look at is saying, oh, I'm busy. That means you made it. When you tell people you don't have time, what you are trying to communicate it is, I am so big, who you are or what you want, all of them are secondary to me. So that means at some level, the scarcity of resources are not just about something out there. It is the scarcity of resources have become part of who we are. We don't have time for each other. We don't have time for love. Like if you go to business meetings, one of the things they say is, I don't have time for a lot of, lecture. Give me net. What is that you are trying to say? Just tell me, what is the summary of that? 30-second elevator pitch is not just for the venture capitalists and the, what you call entrepreneurs. It has become a part of the thing, because if I try to talk to my children and try to give something, say, Dad, I don't have time for lecture. Tell me, what is it that you want me to do or not want me to do? So this is the language. So in that respect, what we are talking about is creating a large amount of ethical challenges. The leadership is in a major crisis, and that is reflected not just in a talk. There was a report that came out by IBM called the Capitalizing on Complexity. It says, when they interviewed approximately 1,600 CEOs, these are global CEOs, they say 80% of them do not feel confident that they know that they can keep their head above the water for the next 5 years. Only 20% of them feel that they know how to manage the business as they go forward. And similarly, if you look at a lot of reports that come out, even the 2012 report or 2011 report, basically the employee disengagement is over 60%. What it means is most people go to work not necessarily fully engaged with the mission, vision, values, or the purpose or the objectives of it. They go there because that's the only way they can get the money. So I will go there, you give me my 4-hour module, I will get it done. If I get it done early, I will not tell you I got it done early because you are going to give me another module. So what am I going to do? I will do whatever I normally do, assume that it is 4 hours, and then I go back. So there is a certain inability for people to connect with the society, with family, and with work. And this reflects in a deep sense of lack of happiness, a deep sense of discontentment, and a large number of what you might call it, the diseases of the rich, the diabetes, obesity, many of the diseases which don't need to come and were not present before because we do everything. I mean, we want it in plastic and we want it in microwave and we want it in a particular way and we want everything to be an accelerated process. So even a rice cooker, which is the faster way to do, that has got a quick mode and a regular mode, because to cook rice it takes 1.5 hours if you do brown rice. So if you put it in a quick mode, it will come out in 30 minutes. So a quick technology has got a quicker solutions. Only thing which we don't have is how to deal with human life. That is one of the things which we are struggling with. So the challenges that come up, and because of all these challenges, what we are struggling with is that there needs to be a radical change in leadership approach. I want to tell a story instead of just talking about the point. This is all about creating context. You know, all of you probably have heard of it sometime or another. Once upon a time in the forest, there was a smart fox and there was a cool cat. They came together right after all the hunters had gone for that particular hunting season. That's what they thought. And they were lamenting about all the people whom they lost, all the friends and all the relatives and all the good friends. And then they were saying, you know what, I just don't know. I don't know how I survived. All my friends are gone. And the smart fox, being the smart one, said, I know at least about 20 different ways in which you can escape from the enemies. And the cool cat said, I don't know. I know only one way. I try to run, find a tree, go hide in one of the branches till, you know, they're all gone. How? Fox says, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. Cat says, will you please teach me? He said, yeah, we have some time. But unfortunately, just like many people, there were some laggards who came really late, the hunters, that fell upon them. And the cool cat saying, I didn't have chance to spend enough time with the fox, so it ran up and hid in a tree. The smart fox, thinking of which one of the 20 ways it needs to save itself, got killed. Sometimes we have to see, are we being smart cats, or are we, smart foxes, are we being cool cats? It does feel like when you listen to a lecture like this, that smart fox is not a great thing. But smart fox get the things done. They are the entrepreneurs, they are the jugaad innovators, they are the people who can figure out ways to make things done. Only thing is we don't know how long they will live. That's a whole different matter, which is not of this subject topic, right? Cool cats get the job done because they have the operational excellence, they know how to stay with something, go deeper, cost, quality, delivery, customer satisfaction. You know, like Silicon Valley is all about cool cats. It's not about smart foxes, even though to get into the job, you need to be a smart fox, but to succeed in the job, you need to be a cool cat. If you don't have that, it doesn't work. So in some respects, without cool cats, execution suffers. But you see, in our mind, we think how smart I am. It doesn't work how smart you are in executing because both the minds operate in a very, very different way. I call cool cats as one kind of smartness, smart fox as another kind of smartness. The cool cats have got what is called a functional smartness. They are very good in a functional expertise. They try to go deep They try to focus on what needs to get done. They stay within the box. They stay very comfortable. They are the people whom you need in your entrepreneurial organization for you to deliver the products and get the job done. Whereas the smart foxes are the people who have the ability to see things across multiple stuff. They are what you might call a business smart. They can see opportunities just like that. They are fast, they are quick, they see the patterns, they interconnect, they look for opportunities. They are the one who raise the money. They can actually make things happen because they can connect the dots much more quickly than other people. Those are generally what we call high IQ at some level, especially when we are talking in the context of business IQ. We need both of them because without the smart foxes, you will not have the growth for it, whatever you are doing in an organization. You need to be able to create the various type of things like out-of-box thinking or innovation or competitiveness comes because of that. What I believe is that sometimes when smart foxes stay only in their foxholes, don't think about the other part, this is what we end up with. These are the legacies of smart fox who went too much out of the box. Probably you can recognize many of them, whether they are a congressman, whether they are a prime minister, whether they are something else. Sometimes we just think we can get away. We just think that we are better than everybody else and nobody needs to pay attention. Now, think about some of these people. These are all CEOs, these are all leaders of different kinds. Are they smart or are they cool? If you begin to think about it, you notice that we have different ways of thinking. Even among the genders, we have a polarization. Somebody said, man has two switches. Women are a lot more complex. Probably women have to tell me whether that is true or not, because they seem to be able to manage the emotional intelligence a lot more. Whereas for men, it has been an issue sometimes. I do believe time has come for us to create a new model. Smartness is not sufficient. One end of smartness is the functional smartness. Another end of smartness is the business smartness. But there is a whole range of smartness spectrum. We need to figure out what is in between. What I propose is a third model, what I call a wise owl. As we know, the owl is known for wisdom. If I bring it back into yoga, the concept of yoga, we talk about, samatvam yoga uchyate. There is a certain equanimity, there is a certain balance that is required. How do you bring the balance? Not by staying in the middle. The yoga way of balancing is not just staying at one place, because that is considered in yoga, if you are not dynamic, you are dead. So the idea is, you move between the two extremes. But while moving between the two extremes of one kind of smartness or the other kind of smartness, you also take a deep breath to be able to say how to be wise. So it is not about getting attached to one kind of mind. It is not about getting attached to the past successes. I come up with a concept called core incompetence. Wherever you got the biggest success last year, that is where your foot is nailed to the floor. Why? When you are really in a crisis, you will go right back to using what brought you success last time. That is what we call sometimes a winning formula. Our children pick it up very quickly. They know how to deal with the mother differently. They know how to deal with the father differently. But when both of them want to stand together and ask the children, they don't want to deal with it. They want to deal with one at a time. Why? They know the winning formula, how to succeed with the mother, how to succeed with the father. But when you bring both of them, then you bring balance. When you try to do that, then it becomes a lot harder. I believe the wise leadership is about learning to balance the two extremes, but in a dynamic way. Learning to take the glasses off. One extreme, you have an entrepreneurial set of glasses. Another extreme, you have the functional glasses. Actually, IBM has come up with a way, call it T kind of personalities they need. You need the depth of an I, but also the crossbar of the T, which is required if you want to be extremely successful in the 21st century. Some of these people are wise leaders in my mind. I tried to bring it from various kinds of scenario. If you notice, I haven't put single business leader really in that. Reason for that is, now for past 2.5 years I have interviewed over 250 people in terms of wise leaders. There are only half a dozen names that came up. Warren Buffett, Narayana Murthy, Ratan Tata, Oprah Winfrey, interestingly, and some people are saying now Bill Gates had moved from being a functional leader, from being a cool cat, he has moved into a little bit wise leader. They say after Steve Jobs died, in some respects he went from being a smart fox. In some of the areas they do believe he has demonstrated certain wisdom. But there are very, very few people who are well known in the world who are considered to be wise leaders in all the characteristics. So in some respects, if you want to look at, wise leadership has penetrated in the consciousness and the cognition in the East quite a bit, but it has not been practiced recently. But thanks to yoga, there is a way in which we are actually beginning to look at it in a much deeper way. What does wise leadership essentially mean? Yogastha kuru karmani. Whatever you do it with the yoga state of the mind. That's all the essence it comes down to. So do whatever. It is not that wise leaders are always wise. As Swami Prasannatmananda was saying a little earlier, you do whatever you do, but sometimes, you may be angry, but you know you are angry. Anger doesn't have you. You have the anger. So the yoga means essentially knowing when I am on this extreme and when I am on this extreme, and learning to be able to consciously and with awareness to be able to move myself from one to another. That is what you might call a equanimity, equanimous mind. Yoga is all about equanimity and some of that. How do I define that wise leadership? I define it as leveraging the smartness. It is not about giving up smartness. It is leveraging your smartness for the greater good, for something beyond what is in it for me. Beyond the greed, figure out enlightened self-interest. You don't have to be altruistic, but from a selfish interest to a selfless interest, bring a balance, bring an enlightened self-interest. That is something which you might look at. Second part of wise leadership is about how do you do that? You balance action with reflection and application of your smartness just to make quick money and introspective. Is this ethically appropriate? Is this going to lead me someplace where I need to go? And then look at it and say, where do I need to bring humility and ethical clarity? Because without humility, wisdom doesn't have much meaning. Remember, it is not a process. You can't just read a book, including whatever I'm trying to write, to become wise. But you look at somebody, you have a certain principles, you have certain practices, but ultimately you need to change your own perspective. You have to develop your own wisdom logic. Is the wisdom I'm talking about same as the spiritual wisdom or a religious wisdom? Or is it a common sense, prudence? I do believe, like Aristotle once talked about phronesis as the practical wisdom, Sophia as the spiritual wisdom. In yoga, for example, is a practical wisdom came from a spiritual set of roots. That's what makes it applicable. That's what makes it something that allows you to be who you are, whatever religion you come from, whatever tradition you have, but still gain the wisdom from multiple places. The concept of yoga, you can look at it from even some of the spiritual traditions, Ardhanarishvara. The concept of balance, concept of bringing in the feminine and the masculine, the yin and the yang. So what can you do to ignite your wise leadership and wise genius? First, when you connect with people, connect as a cool cat. Bring some humility, bring some depth, connect with people at the heart level. focus on how can I add value to them? How can I bring expertise, my ability to do something much more meaningfully? Then include your smart foxness when you think about opportunities. Whether it is opportunities for them, opportunities for me, try to do what you can to do some brainstorming. But the key of leadership is not about what you do. What do other people around you do? Leadership is not about you ever. It is all about role modeling and practicing in such a way people around you are able to do something that they were not able to do by themselves. How do you inspire? How do you ignite leadership in other people? That is what you might want to do. So I will stop with the 6 principles which I am looking at. And by the way, when I say the wise leadership, this one, these are straight from the 18th chapter. If you look at, there are 6 things Krishna talks about for the Sattvic, Rajasic and Tamasic, the whole guna aspects of it. He looks at Gnanam. I translate Gnanam not as knowledge, but I translate Gnanam as perspective. In 18th century, 19th century, in Sanskrit word Gnanam comes to become knowledge. But in the 20th and 21st century, where we talk about data, information and knowledge as a very different interpretation, so when you talk about Pragnanam or when you talk about Vijnanam, Vijnanam is the application of that perspective in creating some technology. That is what is Vijnanam. Pragnanam, Pragna. Dakshinamurti is known for the Pragna. The idea of that brilliant insight, brilliant perspective that you gain, that is again. So from my perspective, in the Sanskrit root, if I look at etymology and if I look at some of it, translating it as a perspective seems to work quite well. It says you need a perspective, but don't stop with it. You need to take right action that is based on what is your dharma. Whoever you are, based on what context you are in, the dharma becomes different. I'm sure you are familiar with a simple story where a famous woman came to learn Bhagavad Gita and she spent a lot of time in India before she came to the Pandit. The monk, or rather the scholar, was very arrogant. A white woman wanting to learn some of this, and he said first one, first sloka of the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Dharma kshetre kurukshetre. And she said, what a beautiful thing. Thank you very much. He said, you woman, shut up and listen. I haven't even completed the full sloka. This is only the first line. He said, but that itself is wonderful. What is wonderful? I just said in this particular location, in that particular shape. Please wait. This is what I understood. She said, Dharma kshetre kurukshetre, you said. What I understood is, kshetre dharmam kuru. Wherever I go, whichever field I am operating from, whether I am in my home, whether I am in work, whether I am in family, dharmam kuru. Do the dharma that is appropriate. That means in a family, I need to do a family dharma. When I am in workplace, I need to do workplace dharma. When I am in community, I need to do community dharma. But if I mix up some of this, somewhere along that, you lose yourself. That is what is called losing dharma. When you lose that, then you have actually gone out of balance. So the right action is about that. And the third one is the karta. Essentially, you have to have a detached engagement. You are an agent of change. You are not the doer, not the enjoyer. That means when you are a CEO or when you are a leader, don't get attached to the job that you have or the role that you have. How many people report into you? How much money you make? Or what is the overall budget? Because this will change. This will go away. I will just finish it in a couple of minutes. I know that you are waiting, and actually we will take the questions in a minute. And I will just stop this with this. All right? I'm aware of you standing for a minute. All right. The fourth one, it comes down to, is the buddhi. The buddhi, as we said, is the logic by which you make the decisions. It is not the intellect alone. And the fifth one, dhruti. Dhruti is, at some level, knowing when to hold, knowing when to fold. Knowing when to That is what you might call a flexible fortitude. So, and finally, Sukham, that is what you call a enlightened self-interest. So in some respects, if I were to give you suggestions, if you want to be a wise leader, find out what is your North Star, what is your Dhruvataara. Where do you want to be 10 years from now, 20 years from now? Develop a larger perspective. Second, act authentically. You have to be authentic, but it has to be appropriate. Because what is authentic for you may not be authentic for somebody else. That's why Manudharma Shastra says, Satyam bruyat, priyam bruyat, na bruyat, satyam apriyam. Tell the truth, but don't tell the truth unless other person is going to receive your truth as something that is desirable. Otherwise, they will not believe in what you say and they will negate your relationship. But whatever you do, do not lie. And similarly, figure out how to lead from the front or lead from the back or let other people lead. And decide, whatever you decide, do it with a certain amount of discrimination and discernment. Don't just decide impulsively. Use your intuition, which is not the same as instinct. And then, finally, be flexible. Know on what basis you are holding on to certain tasks or when you are letting go and why you let go. And then, ultimately, it all comes down to, do you have enlightened self-interest? Which means, do you believe by serving others, you will get served? Or do you believe, if I don't take care of my interests, nobody is going to take care of me? If you can take away that mindset alone, if not anything else, yoga becomes part of what you practice and who you are. And hopefully, when you go back and try to be a leader, recognize other people around you will have a lot more impact. Thank you very much.
We might have time for one question. Are there any questions? Okay, then we'll conclude.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming to the conference.